In the quiet town of Evergreen Pines, surrounded by snow-covered rooftops and glowing holiday lights, the Wilkins family prepared for their most anticipated night of the year. Christmas Eve was a time for joy, laughter, and traditions. But this year, what came down the chimney wasn't bringing gifts. Welcome to Eerie Road Tales, where we uncover chilling stories that will leave you questioning what you thought you knew. Tonight, we tell the story of a holiday turned into horror, a family caught in the grip of something they never saw coming. Stay with us as we uncover the events that transformed a cherished family tradition into a night they wished they could forget forever. In 2009, in the quiet, snow-draped outskirts of Evergreen Pines, the Wilkins family was busy preparing for their favorite night of the year. The small town was the kind of place where neighbors exchanged holiday greetings. Children built snowmen on every street corner, and the belief in Santa Claus was alive and well. Jeff and Marie Wilkins had always worked hard to keep the magic of Christmas alive for their 7-year-old son, Evan, who was as bright and curious as any child could be. This year was no different. Jeff, a devoted father, had spent the afternoon hanging the last of the Christmas lights, determined to make their home the most festive on the block. Inside, Marie had been baking batches of gingerbread cookies, filling the house with a warm, comforting aroma. And Evan? He was practically bouncing with excitement as he placed a carefully arranged plate of cookies and a glass of milk on the hearth, making sure Santa would feel welcomed. The Wilkins family home was a picture-perfect holiday scene. Strings of twinkling lights adorned every window, a towering Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, and stockings were hung neatly above the fireplace. The scent of fresh pine mingled with the sugary sweetness of Marie's baked goods, creating an atmosphere that could have been pulled straight from a storybook. But while the family basked in the warmth of their traditions, the clock steadily ticked closer to midnight. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, Evan was counting down the hours until morning, eager to discover the surprises Santa would leave under the tree. Jeff smiled as he tucked his son into bed, brushing stray locks of hair from Evan's forehead. "Do you think I'll hear Santa this year?" Evan asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Jeff chuckled, "Maybe, if you're very quiet." With that, he turned off the light and closed the door, leaving his son to drift into restless dreams filled with the anticipation of Christmas morning. Marie, ever the perfectionist, double-checked every detail before heading to bed herself. She smoothed the tablecloth on the dining room table, fluffed the cushions on the couch, and adjusted the ornaments on the tree. It was all part of her effort to make Christmas Eve magical, a tradition she took pride in. Everything seemed perfect. The Wilkins had their traditions, their love for one another, and their excitement for the holiday. But as the minutes passed and the house settled into quiet stillness, the air seemed to shift. This year, Christmas Eve was about to become a memory they would never escape. It started as any other Christmas Eve. Evan had placed Santa's treats on the hearth with the precision only a 7-year-old could muster. A perfectly arranged plate of cookies and a tall glass of milk, positioned just so, as if Santa himself might critique the presentation. His father, Jeff, watched with a smile as Evan carefully stepped back to admire his handiwork. Later, as Jeff tucked his son into bed, Evan's curiosity got the better of him. "Do you think I'll hear Santa this year?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Jeff, always ready with a warm laugh, ruffled his son's hair and said, "Maybe, if you're very quiet." The bedroom light clicked off, and the house grew still, save for the faint hum of holiday cheer lingering in the air. As the hours crept toward midnight, the Wilkins home seemed to settle into the peaceful stillness of the season. Snow blanketed the ground outside, muffling the world in silence, and the twinkling lights from the Christmas tree cast soft reflections across the living room walls. But in the quiet, something stirred. It was a faint sound at first, a barely perceptible thump from above. Jeff and Marie, fast asleep in their room, didn't hear it, But Evan, lying wide awake and brimming with anticipation, sat up in his bed. He strained his ears, his heart racing with the innocent excitement of a child hoping to catch Santa in the act. The thump came again, louder this time, as if something, or someone, had landed heavily on the roof. Unable to contain his curiosity, Evan slid out of bed, his small feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. He tiptoed down the hallway and into the living room, his eyes immediately drawn to the fireplace. He crouched behind the arm of the couch, peeking out with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Then, it happened. A soft whisper of ash drifted down from the chimney, followed by more, until tiny clouds of soot began to swirl into the air. Evan frowned. This wasn't what he'd imagined. Santa was supposed to come with jingling bells and cheerful laughter, not this strange, smoky unease. The clock struck midnight, and the house seemed to hold its breath. A low, rolling sound filled the air, deep and deliberate. Evan's heart leapt into his throat as he heard it, unmistakable and chilling. Ho, ho, ho. But something was wrong. The voice didn't carry the warmth and cheer he'd expected. It was hollow, the kind of laugh that seemed to scrape against the walls and echo endlessly. Evan gripped the edge of the couch, his small fingers digging into the fabric. The room filled with a strange, acrid scent, like something burning but not quite wood. The air grew heavy, and for the first time that night, Evan felt something he didn't recognize: unease. Then he saw it. A shadow, faint at first, but growing darker and more defined against the glowing embers of the fireplace. It moved, shifting and stretching as if it didn't quite belong in the space it occupied. Evan's breath caught as the figure began to emerge, slow and deliberate, from the chimney. What came into view wasn't what Evan had imagined when he thought of Santa. The red suit was there, but it was tattered, the edges frayed and stained with streaks of black. The figure's face was obscured by the dim light, but Evan could see enough to know something was terribly wrong. Its movements were jerky, almost unnatural, and its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Evan froze, unable to tear his eyes away. He didn't know whether to run or stay hidden, his young mind unable to process what he was witnessing. The figure crouched, its frame impossibly large for the space, and then it raised its head. The faint glow of the Christmas lights illuminated just enough for Evan to see a crooked grin spread across its face. The laughter came again, low, guttural, and far too close. Evan clutched the edge of the couch tighter, his body trembling. Whatever was standing before him wasn't Santa, at least not the Santa he had dreamed of. And in that moment, all the warmth and joy of Christmas seemed to drain from the room, leaving only the suffocating presence of something he didn't understand but instinctively feared. What emerged from the chimney defied every image Evan had of Santa Claus. The figure crouched low, its massive frame barely fitting in the space. The red suit it wore, once a symbol of warmth and joy, was shredded and smeared with ash and something darker, something sticky that dripped onto the hearth like tar. Its beard hung in clumps, matted and gray, as if it hadn't been washed in centuries. And its eyes, those burning, fiery orbs, glowed with a light that seemed to pierce the room, filling it with a suffocating presence. This wasn't the Santa Evan had imagined. This wasn't the kind, jolly figure from his books and holiday specials. This was something else entirely. Evan's breath quickened as the creature slowly unfolded itself, rising to its full height. Its movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and every shift of its body seemed to scrape against the air like nails on a chalkboard. It tilted its head toward Evan, its crooked grin widening, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. The deep, guttural laugh came again, reverberating through the room and freezing Evan in place. He wanted to scream, but his voice was caught somewhere between his throat and his chest. His small hands gripped the edge of the couch, his knuckles white as he tried to will himself invisible. And then the figure spoke. "You've been waiting for me, haven't you?" The voice was gravelly and low, carrying a weight that seemed to crush the very air in the room. Evan's heart pounded so loudly, he thought the figure must be able to hear it. Before he could process what was happening, the door to his parents' room flew open. Jeff and Marie rushed into the living room, both startled by the sound of Evan's muffled scream. "Evan?" "What's wrong?" Marie began, but her voice faltered as her eyes fell on the figure in the fireplace. She clutched Jeff's arm, her face pale, her body trembling. Jeff stepped forward instinctively, shielding his wife and son. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, though his voice lacked the conviction he hoped for. The figure turned its burning eyes toward Jeff and Marie, its grin never faltering. It took a single, deliberate step forward, its long, clawed hands scraping against the floor with a sound that sent shivers down Evan's spine. "You've welcomed me into your home," it said, its voice dripping with mockery. "And now I'm here to stay." The room seemed to darken, the flickering lights of the Christmas tree dimming as the creature's presence grew heavier, more oppressive. Marie clung to Jeff, her eyes wide with terror. Evan, still crouched behind the couch, watched in horror as the creature took another step forward, its claws leaving deep grooves in the hardwood floor. Jeff grabbed the nearest object he could find, a heavy candlestick from the mantel, and swung it at the figure. But the creature moved with unnatural speed, dodging the blow effortlessly. Its laugh grew louder, filling the room with a sound that made Evan's stomach churn. In the chaos, Evan's eyes darted toward the fireplace poker resting beside the hearth. He didn't think, he acted. Crawling out from behind the couch, his small hands grasped the cold metal rod. "Evan, no." Marie screamed as she saw him move, but it was too late. The creature turned its gaze back to Evan, its grin widening as if it welcomed the boy's defiance. "Brave," it said, almost mockingly. "But foolish." Evan raised the poker with trembling hands. The creature lunged toward him, its claws outstretched, but Evan swung with all the strength his small body could muster. The metal connected with the figure's chest, and for a brief moment, the room was filled with a blinding light. The creature recoiled, its laughter replaced by a low, guttural growl. It staggered back, its claws clutching at the spot where the poker had struck. Black, tar-like substance oozed from the wound, sizzling as it dripped onto the floor. Evan didn't stop. He swung again and again, each strike accompanied by a burst of light and a deafening roar from the creature. Jeff and Marie watched in stunned silence as their son fought against the intruder, his small frame trembling with fear and determination. Finally, with one last swing, the creature let out a bone-chilling screech. Its body began to dissolve, turning to ash and smoke. The acrid scent of sulfur filled the air as it vanished, leaving behind only silence. Evan stood there, the poker still clenched in his hands, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. His parents rushed to him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "It's over," Jeff whispered, though his voice wavered. "It's over." But as they turned to look at the fireplace, their relief was short-lived. Carved into the brick, in letters that seemed to pulse with fresh blood, were the words, "I'll be back." The room fell silent once more, the only sound the faint crackle of the dying fire. The Wilkins family stared at the chilling message, their joy for the holiday forever tainted by the horror they had just endured. The Wilkins family fled their home that night, their footsteps crunching through the freshly fallen snow as they hurried into the icy darkness. They didn't bother to gather their belongings. No coats, no shoes, no cherished Christmas mementos. The decorations that Marie had so lovingly arranged were left behind, their twinkling lights casting an eerie glow through the frost-covered windows. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the house where their holiday joy had turned into unspeakable terror. Jeff carried Evan, who clung to his father's neck with trembling arms, his small face buried against Jeff's shoulder. Marie trailed just behind, clutching her chest, her breaths coming in shallow, panicked gasps. Every shadow in the snow-covered street seemed to shift and twist as if something unseen was watching them. Even the warmth of the nearby streetlights felt cold, offering no sense of safety. The family didn't stop running until they reached the town's only motel. The clerk on duty, an older man with thick glasses, blinked in confusion as the disheveled family stumbled into the lobby, their faces pale and their clothes dusted with ash and soot. Jeff barely managed to choke out a request for a room before collapsing into one of the worn armchairs by the front desk. Inside the motel room, the three of them huddled together on the bed, the door bolted and a chair wedged firmly under the handle. No one spoke. The fear was still too fresh, too raw. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the window, made them jump. As dawn broke, the Wilkins family remained in the room, staring at the faint light filtering through the curtains. None of them had slept. The events of the previous night played over and over in their minds, each of them haunted by the same question. What had they just encountered? In the days that followed, rumors began to swirl around Evergreen Pines. The Wilkins home stood empty, its once cheerful facade now a looming shadow at the end of the quiet street. The decorations remained untouched, lights still twinkling, the wreath still hanging on the door, but the warmth was gone. Neighbors whispered about the family's sudden disappearance, their hurried departure in the middle of the night. Soon, strange reports began to surface. Some claimed to hear faint laughter drifting from the house late at night, a low and hollow sound that sent chills down their spines. Others swore they saw shadows moving behind the curtains, darting from room to room even though no one had entered the home. One neighbor, walking her dog past the house one evening, stopped dead in her tracks when she noticed the front door. Deep scratches ran along its surface, marks that looked as if they'd been made by something impossibly large. The woman pulled her dog away, the animal growling low in its throat as it stared at the darkened windows. The house quickly gained a reputation as a place to avoid. Children dared each other to step onto the front porch, only to run away screaming when they claimed to hear whispers coming from inside. The mailman refused to deliver letters, leaving them instead at the local post office. Inside the Wilkins family's temporary new home, life was far from normal. Evan refused to sleep unless all the lights were on, and even then, his nights were filled with nightmares. Jeff and Marie struggled to explain what had happened, both to themselves and to their son. They debated whether they should tell someone, anyone, about what they had experienced. But who would believe them? As Christmas came and went, the family decided they could never return to Evergreen Pines. The memories of that night were too vivid, the fear too deep. They packed up what little they had and moved far away, leaving their home and their past behind. But even as they settled into a new town, the scars of that night remained. Jeff became overly protective, never letting Evan out of his sight. Marie found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced she was being watched. And Evan? He stopped asking about Santa. He didn't want to see a Christmas tree, hear a carol, or hang a stocking ever again. Back in Evergreen Pines, the house stood empty for years, its windows dark and its yard overgrown. Locals swore it was cursed, a place where something unexplainable had happened. Some said it was haunted, others believed it was simply a dark chapter in the town's history, better left forgotten. But every so often, on cold December nights, the lights in the Wilkins home would flicker on, glowing faintly through the frost. Those brave enough to venture close swore they heard it, the low, guttural laugh of someone, or something that didn't belong. What do you think truly happened on that fateful Christmas Eve? Was it simply the product of a family's fear and trauma, or does the story hint at something far more unsettling hidden beneath the festive folklore of Santa Claus? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Was this an encounter with the supernatural, or is there another explanation? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with those who love a good scare, and subscribe to Eerie Road Tales for more haunting stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare. And remember, the holidays aren't always as cheerful as they seem. Sometimes, the most terrifying stories are hidden behind the warm glow of Christmas lights.